The Kansas plain at 5 in the morning. Flat. Dark. Still. Nothing moving in any direction for, as far as the eye can reach. A single light. A farmhouse set back from the road. A machine shed beside it, door open, yard light throwing a pale circle on the gravel. Move closer. A woman stands in that doorway. 70 years old. Silver hair. A worn canvas coat, that does not belong to her. Coffee going cold in her hand. She is not looking at the shed. She is looking at the ground in front of it. A patch of packed dirt. Empty for 29 years. In her coat pocket, folded once, is a piece of paper her dead husband wrote, before she knew he was dying. A serial number. A single line beneath it. 40 miles east, at a stranger's auction, there is a tractor, with a dent she has never seen, but knows by heart. She has not told anyone she is going. Almeida Pembrook was 70 years old the morning she stood in the doorway of the empty machine shed, and listened to the silence, where an engine used to be. It was 5 in the morning. October, cold enough that her breath showed in the dark. The yard light threw a pale circle across the gravel, and stopped at the edge of the shed floor, where the concrete gave way to packed dirt. She had been up since 4, the way she always was now, the way Warren had always been, the habit outlasting the man who taught it to her. She had her coffee. She had her work gloves tucked into her back pocket. She had intended to check the hydraulic fluid on the current tractor before the temperature dropped any further. Instead, she was standing here, looking at the place where a different machine used to sit. The shed smelled like oil and cold metal, and something older underneath those things, the particular smell of a building that has been used hard for 50 years, and knows it. Almeida had stood in this doorway 1,000 times. She had brought Warren coffee out here on winter nights, when he was elbow deep in something that would not cooperate. She had learned the names of parts she never needed to use herself, learned them the way you learn the vocabulary of someone you love, not because you need it, but because it matters to them, and therefore it matters to you. Warren Pembrook had died in March of 2022. A Tuesday. Soybeans were already in the ground on the south quarter, and the forecast looked decent, and he had been complaining about his left shoulder for 3 weeks, before his heart simply stopped cooperating somewhere between the kitchen and the back door. Almeida had found him at 6:40 in the morning. The coffee was still hot. She had kept the farm running. Not symbolically. Not in the way people mean, when they say someone kept going, after loss, meaning they got out of bed and remembered to eat. She kept 910 acres of wheat and Milo country in Barton County, Kansas, producing income and staying solvent through 2 full growing seasons, with the help of leasing agreements with 3 neighboring operations, and a hired hand named Willis, who knew the equipment and kept his opinions to himself. She knew which fields drained slow after rain. She knew which section of fence on the northwest boundary had been patched 4 times in 12 years, and needed replacing properly. She knew when to call the co-op, and when to wait, because grain prices and patience have a relationship that 49 years of farming alongside Warren Pembrook had made her fluent in. What she did not know, standing in the doorway of that shed in the October dark, was whether she was keeping this farm because it needed keeping, or because she had not yet figured out who she was without it underneath her. That question had been sitting with her since the previous month, since the evening Hadley had driven down from Wichita and put a folder on the kitchen table, with the careful, deliberate movement of a man who had rehearsed the conversation in the car. Hadley was 40 years old. He had his father's forehead and his mother's stubbornness, though he would have pushed back on the second part. He worked in agricultural consulting, and he understood land economics the way Almeida understood soil moisture, which is to say deeply, and with a confidence that sometimes crowded out other considerations. The folder contained a purchase offer from a company called Meridian Land Group. 200 acres on the west boundary. The price was better than fair. The terms were clean. Hadley had laid it out the way he laid out everything, methodically and without drama, walking her through the numbers, with a patience that was genuine, and also, she knew, slightly condescending in the way that adult children sometimes are, with aging parents even, when they are trying their hardest not to be. She had listened. She had looked at the numbers. She understood the argument he was making, because it was a reasonable argument. One woman at 70, a hired hand, and a set of lease agreements was not the same thing as a working multi-generational farm. The land was equity she could not spend. The income from the lease was enough to live on, but not enough to invest. The offer from Meridian was, in Hadley's framing, an opportunity to convert a fixed asset into flexibility while the market was favorable. She had pushed the folder back across the table. He had asked her why. Not impatiently, not unkindly. He genuinely wanted to understand what she was holding on to. She had said, when your father went from 40 acres to 900 over 40 years, was there ever a moment on paper where it made sense to stop? Hadley had not answered right away. She had told him she would think about it. They both understood what that meant, and it was not what she said it was. After he left, she had sat at the kitchen table for a long time in the quiet. She was not thinking about Meridian Land Group, or the numbers in the folder. She was thinking about a question that had no clean answer, the one about whether she was keeping this place because it was right to keep it, or because letting any part of it go would require her to admit that the version of her life that made complete sense had ended in March of 2022, and she had not yet built a new one. She had not reached a conclusion. But she had gone to the shed, and checked the oil in the current tractor, and done the work that was in front of her. That was what you did. Warren had taught her that too. He had come to this land, as a 22-year-old, and spent the first 2 years learning it, from his father the way you learn a language, from someone who thinks in it natively. The farm was 540 acres then. His father had farmed it, after his grandfather, and the history of the Pembrook place went back far enough that people in the county had simply stopped adding further explanation at some point, and just said the Pembrook ground, and everybody knew exactly which fields you meant. When Warren took it over fully, he had treated the expansion the way he treated everything, as a long-term project requiring patience rather than urgency, buying a quarter section when the price was right, and the timing was possible, leasing when buying was not yet feasible, waiting when waiting was the correct move even when it felt like inaction. The tractor had been part of that. A John Deere 4020, 91 horsepower diesel, the kind of machine that had been the backbone of mid-size farming operations for 2 generations, and had earned a reputation that outlasted the era in which it was built. Warren had found this particular one in 1988, bought it used and rough from a retiring farmer over in Pony County, paid $900 for a machine with soft hydraulics and blown injectors, and a service history that was essentially a question mark. He had hauled it home on a borrowed trailer, and spent the next 2 winters in the shed taking it apart and putting it back together, with a service manual he had found at a farm sale, its spine eventually held together with electrical tape, because he had referred to it so many times. Almeida had been the one who brought the coffee. She remembered the shed in winter during those years. The portable heater in the corner that struggled against the cold and mostly lost. Warren lying on a piece of cardboard on the concrete, with a flashlight gripped between his shoulder and his chin, because he needed both hands, and there was no one else to hold the light. She had not understood most of what he was doing, but she had understood the quality of his attention to it, the way a man looks when he is doing something that matters to him completely. She had learned the names of the major components not because she studied them, but because Warren would explain what he was working on when she appeared, with the coffee, talking through the problem partly to inform her, and partly because talking through problems out loud helped him think. By the time he was done, the 4020 ran the way a properly rebuilt machine runs, which is better than new in the ways that count. Warren had a way of saying that a machine you have rebuilt yourself is one you have earned. He meant it not as a boast, but as a factual statement about the relationship between a person and a piece of equipment they have taken entirely apart and put back together with their own hands. The serial number was JD402T891452. She knew it the way she knew their phone number, from 1987, not because she had memorized it deliberately, but because she had heard it often enough, over the years, that it had simply lodged itself somewhere permanent. There was also a dent. Small, on the left side underneath the hood line, where a 9/16 wrench had slipped out of Warren's hand during a hot afternoon in July of 1993, and left a mark he had always meant to hammer out, and simply never got around to, before something else needed doing. He had mentioned it often enough in later years, that it had become a detail in the story of the machine rather than just a physical imperfection, the kind of small specific thing that makes a particular object distinct from every other object of the same make and model. The tractor disappeared on the morning of September 4, 1995. Almeida knew the story the way she knew the facts of her own life, which is to say she knew it, from being inside it rather than from being told it afterward. She remembered the particular quality of that morning, the way the light came in flat and gray before sunrise, the sound of Warren's boots on the kitchen floor, and then the back door opening, and then nothing for a long time. She remembered standing at the sink, with a dish towel in her hands, when he came back inside. He did not have the coffee cup. She saw his face, and she set the dish towel down. He said the tractor was gone? She had stood very still for a moment. And then she said, Odell was here last night. Warren looked at her. She told him what she had not told him in the days leading up to that morning. She had been nursing their younger child at 2 in the morning on the night of September 3rd, and she had heard a sound from the direction of the shed. A small sound, an engine turning over very briefly, and then stopping. She had assumed it was Warren going out to check the equipment before harvest, the way he sometimes did. She had not gotten up. She had not looked out the window. What she understood now, 2 hours after discovering the tractor was gone, was that the engine had run for only a few seconds, before going quiet again. Someone had started it just long enough to confirm it would start, and then shut it off, and pushed the machine out toward the county road in the dark, before starting it again further away. Whoever had taken that tractor had been careful enough, and knowledgeable enough to avoid waking the household, while doing it. That level of familiarity, with the machine, with the farm, with the layout of the yard, and the distance to the road, had not belonged to a stranger. Warren had gone very still, when she told him this. She had not told him the rest of it at the time. The rest of it was that she had heard something else, before the engine sound, footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, the kind of footsteps that belong to someone who is trying not to be heard. She had known, in the loose floating way you know things at 2 in the morning, when you are tired, and nursing an infant, and not yet fully engaged with the world, that the footsteps sounded familiar. She had not known why until later. She had not told Warren that part for the same reason she had not gotten up to look out the window. Because there was a version of the truth that was too specific to be comfortable, and she had not been ready to hand it to him. That morning he drove into town and filed the report with the sheriff's department. The deputy logged the serial number and asked the standard questions. Warren answered them honestly. When asked if anyone had a grudge, he said no, and meant it. When asked about access to the property, he mentioned Odell Hathaway, who had worked for him for 6 years, and who had left the job the previous week. He mentioned it the way you mention a fact, that is adjacent to a situation rather than the way you mention a suspect. Warren believed in Odell Hathaway the way you believe in a man who has shown up reliably for 6 years, and done good work, and given no indication of anything other than what he appeared to be. Odell Hathaway had worked the Pembrook place from 1989 through September of 1995. He was good with machinery in the specific way that made Warren comfortable leaving him alone, with expensive equipment, the kind of comfort that takes years to build, and which Warren did not extend easily. He had left abruptly in the last week of September, explaining that he had found better paying work up north near Salina, and was planning to move his family to take it. Warren had written him a letter of reference before he left. Almeida remembered Warren sitting at the kitchen table composing that letter, choosing the words carefully the way he always did when something mattered to him. It had been a generous letter. Warren had meant every word of it. The insurance adjuster came out and valued the tractor at $7,800, which was lower than what Warren believed the machine to be worth given the rebuild work he had put into it. Insurance companies and mechanics rarely agree on the value of labor that has already been performed, particularly labor performed by the owner rather than a licensed shop. The department circulated the description to neighboring counties. Nothing came back. The case went into a filing cabinet at the Barton County Sheriff's Office, where it would remain for 29 years. Warren added a bank loan to the insurance settlement and bought a newer machine to get through harvest. He did not talk about the 4020 much after the first year. Farmers learn early that mourning a lost season does not plant the next one. There is always something in front of you that requires attention, and the work does not pause because you are not finished grieving. But Almeida had noticed. For months after the theft, sometimes for years, Warren would step outside in the evening, after supper, and stand by the shed, with his hands in his pockets. Not checking anything. Not doing anything. Just standing there in the particular way of a man who is listening for something he already knows he is not going to hear. She had watched him from the kitchen window more times than she could count, and she had never interrupted it, because she understood what it was. It was a man keeping a kind of vigil for something he had built, with his own hands, and then lost to someone he had trusted, which is a specific kind of loss that sits in a different place than ordinary bad luck. She had kept her own vigil in a different way. She had kept the knowledge of what she had heard that night folded up inside herself like a document she was not ready to open. 29 years had passed the way they pass on a farm, in seasons rather than calendar pages, marked by what came out of the ground, and what the weather did, and what the prices were, when it was time to sell. Warren and Almeida had expanded the operation to 910 acres through the patient accumulation of opportunity, buying a quarter section, when the timing was right, leasing where buying was not yet feasible, building something that the two of them had made together in a way that no piece of paper could fully account for. Warren had taught her everything he knew. Not because he had planned to, not as a formal transfer of knowledge, but because they had worked alongside each other long enough that the knowledge had simply passed between them the way things pass between people who spend 49 years paying attention to each other. She was the one who had kept it running after he was gone. She was the one who had told Hadley no about the Meridian offer, at least for now, at least until she understood what she was protecting and why. She was also the one sitting at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening in October of 2024, when Gideon Whitaker called. Gideon was 72. He had farmed 300 acres of Barton County his whole adult life, and had been Warren's closest friend for 40 years. He was not a man who called to chat. When he called it was because something was worth saying. He told her about an estate auction coming up in Rush County, 2 counties east. A man named Brewster Galloway's had died that spring, apparently without close family, and the nephew handling the estate was selling off everything through an auction house. Equipment sale was scheduled for the last Saturday in October. The listing mentioned a grain cart in reasonable condition at what looked like a fair price. He thought she might be interested, since she had mentioned needing something smaller for the North Field operation. She thanked him, and after she hung up she unfolded the auction flyer he had dropped in her mailbox earlier that week. She had not looked at it carefully before. She looked at it now. The listing was 3 columns of items in small print. She went through it the way she went through any equipment listing, starting with the large items and working down. Combines. Disc harrows. Grain wagons. A hay baler. Several tractors. One of them was listed as a John Deere 4020, condition good, repainted, asking to be sold as is. There was no photograph. The description was 6 words. Almeida set the flyer down on the kitchen table. She picked it up again. She read those 6 words again. Then she went to the drawer, where she kept Warren's important papers, and took out the envelope that had been in his desk since before he died, the one she had found when she cleared his files the month after he was gone. Inside was a piece of paper, with the serial number JD402T891452 written in his hand, and below it, in a script slightly unsteady in the way of a man writing something important late in life, a single line. If you find it, before I get the chance, remember the dent on the left below the hood line, where the wrench slipped in July of '93. That is my mark. She had never understood why he wrote those words, until this moment. She sat at the table for a long time. There were 100,000 John Deere 4020 tractors in this country. They were not rare machines. Finding one at an estate sale in Kansas was not unusual. The listing told her almost nothing. She had no reason to believe this was anything other than a different machine, with the same name. She also did not sleep well that night. In the morning she called Gideon back, and asked if he would drive her down to Rush County on Saturday. He asked why she did not want Hadley to take her. She told him she was not ready to explain to Hadley why she needed to go, until she knew whether there was anything to explain. Gideon understood that the way he understood most things, without requiring elaboration. He said he would be at her door at 7. She thanked him, and hung up, and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the yard. The shed was visible from where she stood. The current tractor was inside it, a newer machine, practical and dependable, and entirely without history. The place in front of the shed, where Warren used to park the 4020 during harvest season, was empty now, the way it had been empty for 29 years, the way some spaces stay empty not because nothing has filled them, but because what was there before left a particular shape that other things do not quite match. She went back to work. That was what you did. Before she went to bed, that night she put Warren's envelope in the left pocket of his flannel coat, the same pocket where he had always kept his keys. Then she took the small brass key from the ceramic dish on his desk, the one she had found weeks ago, when she finally sorted his personal effects and had not yet matched to any lock, and put it in the same pocket. She did not know why she brought the key. She brought it the way you bring things that feel like they belong to the same story even when you cannot yet see how. The auction ground sat on the eastern edge of Brewster Galloway's property, a flat stretch of harvested ground between the farmhouse and a line of bare cottonwoods that marked a creek bed running dry. By the time Almeida and Gideon arrived, 100 people had already spread across the rows of equipment in the cold morning air, moving the way people move at these things, unhurried and methodical, kicking tires and checking hour meters, and running thumbs along weld seams, with the practiced skepticism of men who have bought used equipment before and know what a rushed repair job feels like under your fingers. Almeida had been to enough estate sales to know how they worked. You walked everything first. You made your notes. You waited for the bidding to start, and you did not let the crowd's energy make decisions for you. She had done this dozens of times alongside Warren, and a handful of times alone in the 2 years since he died, and she was competent at it. She was not thinking about the 4020 when she started walking the rows. She was telling herself she was not thinking about it. Gideon stayed half a step behind her the way he always did, when he sensed she needed space to think, without the obligation of conversation. He had known her long enough to understand the difference between the silence that wanted company and the silence that wanted to be left alone. This morning it was the second kind. She went through the first 2 rows. Combines at the far end, older models, one of them, with sheet metal patched over the feeder house in a way that told its own story. A disc harrow in decent shape. 3 grain wagons of varying vintage. She noted the grain cart Gideon had mentioned, checked the running gear, and the auger, and made a mental note that the price would probably be fair. She turned into the 3rd row. Later she would not be able to say exactly what stopped her. The mind does not always announce what it is doing, before it does it. She was in the middle of a sentence about the grain cart, when her feet stopped, and the sentence did not finish. It was sitting between an old grain drill and a stack of fence panels, parked in the partial shadow under a lean-to roof at the end of the row. The paint was a flat, unremarkable green, not the bright factory color of a working John Deere, but the kind of green you get when someone applies implement paint to something that has been sitting long enough that the original surface has gone dull. No yellow trim anywhere. No logo visible. At a quick glance it was just another old tractor at an estate sale, the kind that gets a second look from collectors and a first look from everyone else, and nothing more. Almeida was not looking at the color. She was looking at the way it stood. Warren had explained it to her once, the particular geometry of a machine that has had its front axle adjusted during a rebuild. When you set the toe angle yourself rather than trusting the factory specification, the machine develops a slight individual character in the way it sits on flat ground, a lean so small that most people would not register it consciously, but that becomes as recognizable as a neighbor's walk once you have seen it enough times. This tractor was leaning almost imperceptibly to the left. Not a mechanical failure. Just the permanent signature of a specific pair of hands that had done specific work on a specific afternoon in a machine shed in Barton County 36 years ago. She walked toward it. Gideon followed without asking why. She crouched down in front of the machine, her knees complaining the way they did in cold weather now, and she reached out and placed her hand on the left side of the hood below the line, where the paint met the grill. She did not search for the spot. Her hand went directly to it the way your tongue finds the gap, where a tooth used to be, not from seeing, but from the body's own memory of absence. Under her palm, barely perceptible through the layers of paint and weather, the metal was not flat. It was slightly concave in a shape no larger than a silver dollar, the kind of mark left by an impact that was never fully repaired. She stood up. Her hands were steady. She reached into the left pocket of Warren's flannel coat and took out the envelope, and unfolded the paper inside, and read the number written there. Then she walked to the front left corner of the tractor, and crouched again, lower this time, looking up at the underside of the frame, where the serial number plate was riveted into the steel. JD402T891452. She read it twice. The second time she mouthed the digits, without making any sound. Gideon had come to stand beside her. He was looking at the plate, and then at the paper in her hands, and he was not saying anything, because there was nothing useful to say yet. Almeida stood up slowly, one hand on the fender for balance. She looked at the tractor for a moment without speaking. 29 years of flat, unremarkable green paint, over a machine she had last seen in the yard of her own farm, when Hadley was in grade school, and his younger sister was still in diapers. She looked at it the way you look at something you were not certain you would ever see again, and then suddenly have, which involves a complicated mixture of relief, and something that is not quite grief, but sits in the same neighborhood. She said, "I need to find whoever is running this sale." Marvine Wyndham had been managing estate auctions across south-central Kansas for 19 years. She was 58, efficient, and possessed of the particular patient skepticism of someone who has spent 2 decades as the point of contact between grieving families, estate attorneys, and the general public's complicated relationship with the concept of what belongs to whom. She was not unkind. She was also not easily moved by sentiment at 8 in the morning on a sale day. She listened to Almeida, with her arms crossed, and her expression carefully neutral, the specific neutral of a professional, who is giving someone the full benefit of the doubt, while also reserving judgment about whether that doubt is warranted. When Almeida finished, Marvine said, "Can you describe the identifying features, before I let you near it again?" Almeida described the front axle lean. She described the dent under the left hood line, its approximate size and location, the fact that it had never been fully repaired. Then she said, "Behind the seat, on the frame rail on the right side, there should be 2 letters cut into the metal, with something sharp. W and P. Not stamped, not painted. Carved by hand. Warren used them to mark the seat adjustment point, after he set the height for his own frame. He was 6'1", and the factory position was wrong for him. Marvine looked at her for a moment. Then she walked to the tractor, without another word. She was gone 4 minutes. When she came back, her expression had shifted, from carefully neutral to something more careful still, the look of a person who is updating their assessment of a situation in real time, and has not yet finished deciding what to do with the update. She said, "I will need to pull the estate paperwork on that machine." She had not said Almeida was wrong. She had not said Almeida was right either, but she had stopped looking at her the way she had been looking at her before, which was a different kind of answer. Colton Galloway's arrived, before Marvine came back, with the paperwork. He was 38, dark coat, good shoes that were not appropriate for the mud at the edge of the equipment rows, and the particular composure of a man who managed complexity for a living, and had been doing it long enough that his default mode was control rather than engagement. He had driven down from Columbus for the sale, and he had been expecting a straightforward morning. Almeida and the situation she represented were not part of his expectation. He was not rude. That was what made him difficult to argue with. He was polite and measured and absolutely immovable. He said that the estate had been properly inventoried, and the auction properly organized, and that without a court order there was no mechanism by which a single piece of equipment could be pulled from an active sale based on an unverified claim from a third party. Almeida did not argue about the legal framework. She did something simpler. She said, "Marvine, will you read me the serial number off that plate? Out loud, please." Marvine, who had the estate paperwork in her hands by now, looked from Almeida to Colton, and then read the number off the plate she had checked 4 minutes ago. Almeida placed Warren's paper on the hood of the tractor, where both of them could see it. The number in Warren's handwriting matched the number Marvine had just read, character for character, including the format and spacing of the prefix. Colton looked at the paper. He looked at Almeida. He reached into his coat pocket for his phone. Marvine said to Almeida, quietly, while Colton was dialing, "I can hold it off today's list. That is the extent of what I can do, without law enforcement involved. If you want this to go any further, you need a badge, not me." Almeida had already taken her own phone out. She was not calling Hadley, not yet. She called the Rush County Sheriff's non-emergency line, and told the dispatcher what she had found, and who she needed to speak with. Then she looked at Colton Galloway's across the hood of the tractor, and said, evenly, without heat, "You can talk to your attorney. That is a reasonable thing to do. But that number has been in a filing cabinet at the Barton County Sheriff's Office since September of 1995, and it matches what is on this machine. That is not something either one of us can argue our way around." Colton said that, without documentation from law enforcement, his position had not changed. Almeida said, "It will." She was right. She knew she was right. But knowing something is true, and having the institutional weight to prove it are two different things, and she was standing alone in a field in a county she did not live in, without an attorney, and without the original file number, and against a man who had his own counsel already on the line. She called Hadley. She had not wanted to call Hadley here. She had not wanted to hand him a situation that was still uncertain, had not wanted to give him the opportunity to apply his particular brand of careful, reasonable doubt to something she knew in her hands and her chest before she knew it in her head. But she needed the file number. The original theft report. The copy of the serial number that Warren had filed with the Barton County Sheriff's Department on the morning of September 4, 1995. Hadley answered on the second ring. She told him where she was and what she had found. She told him quickly, and without preamble, because she did not have time for preamble. She told him she needed him to go to the farm, to the storage room off the mudroom, where Warren kept the long-term filing boxes, and to find the blue folder from 1995. There was a pause on the line. Then Hadley said, "Mom? Are you sure about this?" She said, "I need the file number, Hadley." Bottom shelf, left side, blue folder. She heard him moving. Heard a door, heard the sound of boxes being shifted, heard the silence of a man looking through his dead father's papers in a storage room in a farmhouse 40 miles away. She stood next to the tractor, with her hand resting on the hood, and waited. The auction had started in the rows further back. She could hear the auctioneer's voice carrying across the field, the rapid cadence of bid calls rising and falling over the low murmur of the crowd. The world was moving forward at its normal pace around a small still point, where she was standing. Gideon had positioned himself between her and Colton Galloway's, with the unhurried ease of a large man who has spent 72 years knowing exactly how much space he occupies and when to use it. Hadley came back on the line. She heard something in his voice, before he said a word, a quality of stillness that was different from his usual register. He said, "I found it. File number SP 1995-0847. Barton County Sheriff's Department. Serial number JD 402T891452. She heard him stop. She said, "Keep reading. There is something behind the report." Another pause. Longer this time. She knew what he was finding, because she had put it there herself. After Warren died, the carbon copies she had found tucked into the back of the folder, when she went through his files. The letter of reference Warren had written for Odell Hathaway. 2 pages, handwritten draft with the typed final copy behind it. Dated August 28, 1995. 8 days before the tractor disappeared. Hadley said, "This is a reference letter for someone named Odell Hathaway. Dad wrote this." She said yes. He said, "The date is August 28, 1995. She said she knew. He was quiet for a moment, and she let him be quiet, because he was doing the same arithmetic she had done when she found that document 2 years ago, the arithmetic of trusting a person, and what it costs when the trust turns out to have been extended in the wrong direction. Hadley said, "Does this mean what I think it means?" She said, "I think so." He said, "Did Dad know who took it?" She said, "Read me the file number again, please." He read it. She gave it to Deputy Burkett Caldwell, who arrived at the auction grounds 40 minutes later in a Rush County cruiser, unhurried and thorough in the way of a man who has spent 25 years making sure he understands the situation before he moves on it. Hathaway was 52, heavy-set, with the kind of deliberate manner that people sometimes mistake for slowness until they watch him work. He checked the serial number himself. He called Barton County directly and had the file confirmed in 11 minutes. He filled out the paperwork to place the tractor in temporary custody pending the outcome of the stolen property verification process, which was a formal way of saying that the machine was not going anywhere today. Colton Galloway's had his attorney on the phone when Caldwell explained this to him. His attorney apparently said something clarifying, because Colton's expression shifted from controlled resistance to controlled acceptance in the space of about 30 seconds. He did not offer his hand when he walked away. He did not need to. Caldwell took Almeida's full statement standing next to the tractor, with the auction noise drifting across from the other rows. She told him everything in the order it happened. The theft in 1995. Warren's report. Odell Hathaway's departure the same week. The insurance settlement. The file in the storage room. The auction listing. The serial number. When she finished, Caldwell looked at his notes, and then at the tractor, and then back at her. He said, "The man you mentioned, Odell Hathaway. Do you know where he is now?" Almeida said she did not. She had not heard the name in nearly 30 years. Caldwell said, "He died in 2018. Rush County. Brewster Galloway's, the man who owned this property, died this past spring." Almeida stood very still. Caldwell said it in the even way he said everything, not unkindly, just factually, but the fact itself landed with a particular weight. Both of the men at the center of this story were gone before the story surfaced. There would be no confrontation. No explanation. No moment where a man looked another person in the eye and accounted for what he had done. Whatever Odell Hathaway had told himself over the years about why he did what he did, he had carried it to wherever those things go, when a man is finished carrying them. Almeida had been prepared, in some abstract way, for the possibility that Odell was dead. She had not thought carefully about what it would feel like to have that confirmed while standing 10 feet from the machine he had taken. She looked at the tractor for a moment. The flat green paint. The particular way it stood, with its left shoulder down. The mud on the front tires, from whatever field Brewster Galloway's had last used it in, before he got too old or too sick to use it anymore. She said to Hathaway, "He took good care of it." Caldwell looked at the tractor, and agreed that he had. He told her the formal recovery process would take 2 to 3 weeks for the paperwork to clear between counties, but that there should be no complications given the documentation. He would be in touch. She should not worry about the Galloway's nephew. The civil side of it was not her concern. The ownership question was settled by the original theft report and the matching serial number, and nothing Colton Galloway's attorney said to her was going to change that. Gideon drove her home. She sat in the passenger seat and watched the flat Kansas landscape go past in the low October light. The cottonwoods along the creek beds had mostly gone gold, and the fields were brown and open after harvest, and the sky was the particular pale gray of a day that has not decided yet whether it wants to clear. Gideon drove without talking, which was one of the things she valued most about him. He understood that some things needed to be written in silence. About 20 miles from home, she said, Warren knew where it was. Gideon said, "What?" She said he knew. Not in 1995. But later. He asked you in 2019 if you knew anyone who knew Brewster Galloway's. You mentioned that to me this morning on the drive down. Gideon was quiet for a moment. He said, "That is right. He asked me once, and I could not help him, and he never brought it up again." She said he knew. And he did not do anything about it. She was not angry when she said this. She was not sure what she was. The word for it had not come to her yet, and she was not going to reach for a word that did not fit just to have something to call it. Gideon said, "You think he knew before he died?" She said, "I know he did." She looked out the window at the fields going by. Warren had farmed land like this his whole life. Had read it the way other people read weather, knowing from small signs what it was holding, and what it needed, and what it was going to do, before it did it. He had been wrong about Odell Hathaway, wrong in a way that had cost him something real, and he had spent 29 years rearranging his understanding of that particular wrongness. She did not know yet what he had decided. But she knew there was a letter. And she knew that the small brass key in her coat pocket was connected to it in some way she had not yet been able to see. She reached into the pocket and held the key between her fingers for the rest of the drive home, and said nothing more. The small key had been in the ceramic dish on Warren's desk for longer than Almeida had realized. She had assumed it belonged to something she would eventually identify, a filing cabinet, a lockbox from the barn, one of the dozen minor mysteries that accumulate in a man's workspace over 50 years of keeping things. She had tried the obvious places in the weeks after he died, and nothing had fit, and she had told herself she would figure it out eventually, and then had mostly stopped trying. It was November now, 3 weeks after the auction. The tractor was still in Rush County pending the formal paperwork clearance that Hathaway had told her to expect. She had gone about her week the way she went about every week, checking the equipment, reviewing the lease agreements, corresponding with Willis about the late-season work on the north field. She had told Hadley about the key during one of his twice-weekly calls, and he had said he would come down that weekend to help look. He arrived on a Friday evening, later than he had planned, because of a project delay in Wichita, and they ate supper together at the kitchen table. He asked how she was doing, and she told him honestly, which was that she was better than she had been in September, but that she would not know what better actually meant until she understood what Warren had left her to find. After supper she showed him the key. He turned it over in his hands, small and brass, and old, the kind of key that belongs to something built to last rather than something built to be convenient. He asked where she had looked. She told him. He was quiet for a moment, and then said, "What about the chest in the back bedroom?" She had forgotten about the chest. It had been in this house, since before Warren was born, a low cedar chest at the foot of the bed in the back room they used for storage, with a lock plate on the front she had never paid particular attention to, because she had never seen it open. She had assumed the key was long gone. They went to the back bedroom together. The chest sat, where it had always sat, dark cedar, the hinges slightly oxidized, the lock plate tarnished but intact. Almeida knelt in front of it, and put the key in the lock. It turned on the first try. Inside the chest, below a folded wool blanket, that smelled of cedar and thyme, was a wooden box the size of a shoebox, and inside the wooden box was an envelope. The envelope was sealed. On the front, in Warren's handwriting, was a single word. Alm. She sat back on her heels, and looked at it for a moment. Hadley was behind her, very still. She picked up the envelope, and stood and carried it to the kitchen table, because that was where things were decided in this house, and this was something that needed to be decided in the right place. She sat down. Hadley sat across from her. She opened the envelope. There were 2 pages inside, both handwritten in Warren's script, dated February of 2022, 1 month before he died. The handwriting was slightly looser than his usual careful print, the letters of a man who was tired, but who had something specific he needed to get down, before he ran out of time to get it down. She read it through once without stopping. Then she set it on the table, and sat quietly for a moment, with her hands flat on either side of the pages. Hadley said, "What does it say?" She pushed the pages across the table to him. Warren had written that in 2019 he had heard Brewster Galloway's name mentioned in a conversation at the co-op, an offhand reference by a Rush County farmer to a neighbor of his, who still ran an old 40-20, and kept it in exceptional condition for its age. Warren had not reacted visibly. He had gone home, and asked Gideon if he knew anyone who knew Brewster Galloway's, and Gideon had said he did not, and Warren had let it rest there publicly. But he had not let it go. Over the following months he had made quiet inquiries through the indirect channels that exist in farming communities, the shared networks of equipment dealers, and co-op managers, and county extension agents, who move through multiple operations, and carry more knowledge about the ground than the public record ever shows. By early 2020 he knew that Brewster Galloway's had been farming a 200-acre operation in Rush County since the mid-1990s, and had acquired most of his equipment during that period, including a rebuilt 40-20 that he had bought at a swap meet in the fall of 1995. Warren had known. He had known for 2 years, before he died, that the tractor was 40 miles away on a dead-end county road in Rush County on the property of a man named Brewster Galloway's, who was, by every indication Warren could find, an ordinary farmer, who had bought a machine in good faith, and had no knowledge of its history. Warren wrote that he had driven out to Rush County once, just to look. He had not gone onto the property. He had pulled over on the road that ran along the eastern edge of Galloway's land, and looked across the field at the equipment parked near the barn, and he had been able to see, from that distance, the outline of a 40-20, with the particular posture he would have recognized anywhere. He had sat there for a while. Then he had driven home. He wrote, "I am not a man who believes the world owes him what he has lost. I lost something real, and it cost me, and for years I was angrier about it than I let on to anyone, including you. But by the time I found it again I was not the same man who lost it." Brewster Galloway's was not Odell Hathaway. He was an old man who bought a machine 30 years ago, from someone who lied to him, and had been farming his own ground with it ever since. Taking it back from him would not have given me back what was actually lost, which was the 6 years I spent trusting someone who took that trust and used it to take something of mine. The tractor was not the real thing I lost. I knew that by 2020. He wrote that he had decided to let Brewster Galloway's keep the machine, and finish out whatever years he had left on his own land. And that when Brewster was gone, and the estate was settled, if the tractor surfaced in a way that brought it back, then it was meant to come back. And if it did not, then it had done enough good in the world on Brewster's ground to justify its continued existence somewhere other than his shed. There was one more thing in the letter, something Warren had learned, through the same quiet county network in the months after he located the tractor. Brewster Galloway himself had learned the truth in 2018. Odell Hathaway had told him near the end, when Odell was dying in a Rush County hospital, and apparently needed to set something down before he went. Brewster had not gone to the police. Odell was already beyond any point where the law could reach him, and Brewster had reasoned, correctly Warren thought, that involving law enforcement then would accomplish nothing beyond disrupting whatever peace remained in two old men's final years. So Brewster had kept his knowledge the way certain men keep certain things, privately and without complaint. He had not repainted the tractor again, after that conversation. He had left it in its imperfect recovered state, as the only acknowledgement available to him, that the machine had a history he had not known about, and could not undo. Warren had understood that decision the moment he heard it. He wrote, "I am leaving this for you, because I want you to understand why I did not tell you. You would have helped me think it through, and thinking it through is exactly what I did not need. I had already thought it through. I needed someone to leave it with, and the only person I have ever trusted with the things I could not say out loud is you." The last section was addressed to Hadley by name. Hadley read his name at the top of the paragraph and stopped. He looked up at Almeida. She nodded. Warren had written, "Hadley, your mother has been running this farm since March, and she will be running it as long as she wants to run it. Do not make her defend that to you. The land is not mine to leave to anyone. It is ours, which means it is hers, and what she decides to do with it is her decision to make without explanation. You were raised on this ground, and you know what it means to the people who have worked it. Trust that she knows too. She always has." Hadley set the pages down on the table. He did not say anything right away, and Almeida did not push him. She had read the letter, and experienced it the way you experience something you already knew at a level below language, the confirmation of something felt rather than the delivery of something new. Warren had understood the situation, with the tractor, with the same thorough patience he applied to everything, and had arrived at a conclusion she recognized as his, measured and final, and entirely consistent with the man she had known for 50 years. What she had not known, what she had not expected to find in those 2 pages, was the last paragraph. The one with no address line at the top, written in script slightly smaller than the rest, as if he had added it at the end of a long effort, and had only a little room left. He had written, If you are reading this, it is because you found the tractor before I expected anyone to find it. I want you to know that I was aware of what you heard that night. I have known for a long time. You did not tell me, because you thought it would hurt me to know you were that close to stopping it, and I did not tell you that I knew, because I did not want you to carry the weight of having not told me. We have been protecting each other from the same fact for 29 years. I think that is probably the most honest thing I can say about what we built together." Almeida read that paragraph 3 times. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator ran in the corner. Outside the window the yard light was on, and beyond it the dark shape of the shed was visible against the night sky. Hadley said quietly, "Did you know he knew?" She said no. He said, "Are you all right?" She thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about. She said, "I think so. I think I will be." He nodded. He stayed that night, and most of the next day, and they talked more in those 24 hours than they had talked in the 2 years since Warren died, not about the farm, or the Meridian offer, or the mechanics of running 900 acres short-handed, but about Warren himself, about who he had been, and what he had decided, and what it meant that he had made the decisions he made. Hadley had not known his father had found the tractor. Had not known about the drive to Rush County, the view across the field, the choice to turn around and come home. Learning it now did something to his understanding of his father that he did not have easy words for. Almeida watched it happen on his face, and recognized it, because she was experiencing something similar. You think you know a person completely. And then you find out you knew them even better than you thought, which turns out to be a different thing entirely. The formal recovery paperwork cleared on a Thursday in the third week of November. Caldwell called to let her know the tractor was ready to be collected. Hadley drove down that Saturday morning with the trailer, a 4-hour round trip on a clear cold day, and Almeida rode with him. Colton Galloway's had not pursued the civil complaint. Caldwell had confirmed this, with a brief call the previous week, informing Almeida that the estate's legal representation had reviewed the documentation and determined there was no viable claim. She had not been surprised. She had also not been entirely without sympathy for Colton, who had come to Kansas expecting a straightforward property liquidation, and had instead spent 3 weeks entangled in a stolen property case from 1995. He had not created this situation. He had simply walked into it the same way most of the people in this story had walked into things they did not fully understand at the time. The tractor was parked at the edge of Galloway's property, where Caldwell's department had left it, sitting in the same flat open ground where the auction had been held 3 weeks before. The other equipment was long gone. It was just the 40-20, and the bare stubble field, and the line of cottonwoods along the creek, and the pale winter sky. Hadley brought the trailer around, and positioned it, and then looked at Almeida. She said, "I will do it." He did not argue. He had stopped arguing with her about certain things, and this was clearly one of them. She walked to the tractor, and climbed up into the seat. The cab was open, no enclosure, and the November air was sharp and still. She settled into the seat, which sat lower than the machines she was used to, because Warren had adjusted it for his own frame, and never changed it back. She had known it would be lower. She had known it would feel different from anything she had driven before. She put the key in the ignition. The diesel turned over once, hesitated, and caught. The engine settled into its running rhythm, low and even, and entirely steady, the sound of something built to work, and kept in condition to do it. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel, and felt the vibration moving through the metal, and through the seat, and up into her palms, and she held it for a moment the way you hold something you have been waiting a long time to hold. Gideon had come. She had not specifically invited him, and she had not needed to. He was standing 20 feet away, with his hands in his coat pockets, not watching her exactly, but present in the particular way he was always present, accounted for without demanding anything in return. She looked at him across the distance, and he gave her the small nod of a man who has understood something, without being told it, and does not need to say so out loud. She eased the tractor forward, and up the trailer ramps, with the careful deliberate movements of someone who has done this before in the abstract, and is doing it in the specific for the first time. It went smoothly. The machine was responsive, and the gearing was direct and unhurried, exactly right for its age and its history. When she had it positioned on the trailer, and shut off the engine, the silence that came after was a different quality of silence than the one that had existed before she started it. She climbed down. Hadley was securing the chains at the front. He worked without comment, efficient and focused, and she stood beside the trailer, and looked at the machine sitting there on the deck, with its flat green paint, and its particular geometry, and its 29 years of complicated history written into every modified and weathered surface. She thought about Brewster Galloway's, who had bought this machine from a man he had no reason not to trust, and had worked it faithfully for nearly 3 decades, and had learned the truth of it only near the end, and had chosen to hold that truth without making a drama of it. Who had stopped repainting the machine after Odell told him. Who had left it in its imperfect recovered state, as the only acknowledgement available to him. Who had died before anyone came to collect what he had been quietly, without fanfare, keeping safe. She thought about Odell Hathaway, who had sat across her kitchen table every day for 6 years, and accepted Warren's trust, and Warren's wages, and Warren's careful letter of recommendation, and had used all of it to take what he needed and go. She had spent years carrying something like anger for what Odell had done. Standing here now, she found that the anger had become something quieter, not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness requires an accounting, and there was no one left to account, but a kind of tiredness at the waste of it. Odell had needed something, and had not found a way to ask for it honestly, and the decision he had made instead had shaped 29 years of other people's lives in ways he likely never fully tracked. Hadley finished securing the chains, and came to stand beside her. He looked at the tractor for a moment, and then said, "Are you going to repaint it?" She looked at the flat green surface, the absence of the yellow trim, the general appearance of a machine that had been made anonymous by someone who wanted it to stop telling its own story. She thought about Brewster Galloway's decision not to repaint it a second time. The choice to leave it in its complicated state, after Odell told him the truth. The quiet acknowledgement in that choice of everything the machine had been, before it came to him. She said, "Not yet. The story is in the paint. All of it. And I am not ready to cover that over." Hadley nodded the way he had been nodding for the past 2 days, the nod of a man who is revising something he thought he had already finished understanding. They drove home. The tractor sat on the trailer behind them, visible in the side mirror, moving through the Kansas landscape at highway speed. Almeida watched it back there occasionally, the familiar shape moving through country it belonged to, finally going in the right direction. She had not told Hadley about the last paragraph of Warren's letter, the one addressed to her. She had decided that was hers to keep, at least for now, at least until she understood what to do, with the knowledge that two people, who had spent 49 years trying to protect each other, from the same fact had managed it, so completely that neither of them had ever known the other was doing it. She was not sure that was sad. She was not sure it was not. It was something that did not have a clean name, and she was old enough to know that the things worth carrying rarely do. When they turned onto the county road that led to the farm, the light was low and coming in from the west at an angle that turned everything amber and long-shadowed. The farmhouse was visible from half a mile out, the yard light already on above the gravel, the shed door open the way she had left it that morning. Hadley backed the trailer into the yard and lined it up carefully, and Almeida got back into the seat for the second time that day and drove the tractor off the trailer and across the gravel and into the space in front of the shed where it had sat every harvest season for 7 years, before the night it disappeared. She shut off the engine. The yard was very quiet. The cottonwood at the corner of the fence had dropped its last leaves, and they were scattered across the gravel in thin papery layers. The yard light hummed above the shed door. Somewhere down the section road a truck passed, and was gone. She climbed down, and stood next to the tractor, and looked at it in the yard light, this machine that had been built in the 1960s, and bought rough in 1988, and rebuilt through 2 Kansas winters, and stolen in the dark of a September night in 1995, and driven 40 miles in the wrong direction, and sold at a swap meet, and worked on a stranger's ground for 29 years, and repainted and maintained, and finally returned to the place it started. Gideon had followed them home, and was standing near his truck, with his hands still in his coat pockets. He looked at the tractor, and then at her, and said, "Warren would have something to say about this." She said, "He would have said it was just a tractor, and then he would have gone inside, and thought about it for 3 days." Gideon made the sound that passed for laughter in a man who expressed everything at 1/3 the volume of most people. Hadley came to stand beside her. He put his hand on her shoulder, and left it there for a moment, the same gesture Warren had used, when words were not the right tool, and she understood where her son had learned it, and she was glad he had. After a while Hadley said he needed to head back to Wichita, before it got too late. She told him to drive carefully. He hugged her in the way he had started hugging her, since Warren died, longer than before, and with more of his weight in it, like a man who has understood that certain things do not stay open forever, and that you cannot afford to be casual about the ones that still are. She watched him go. Gideon left shortly after, lifting a hand from the window of his truck as he pulled out of the yard. Then it was just Almeida, and the tractor, and the quiet November evening. She went inside, and put the kettle on, and stood at the kitchen window, while the water heated. The yard light showed her the outline of the 40-20 sitting exactly where she had parked it, solid and improbable and real. She had looked out this window 10,000 times, and she had seen that patch of gravel empty for 29 years, and now it was not empty, and the fact of it being not empty was something she was still in the process of absorbing. The kettle began to sound. She did not move immediately. She was reading the last lines of Warren's letter again, from memory, the lines about two people protecting each other, from the same fact for 29 years, without either of them knowing the other was doing it. She had heard a sound on the night of September 3, 1995. She had not gotten up. She had carried that for 29 years, as a private weight, the heaviest kind, the kind that has no external evidence, and cannot be shared. Warren had known. He had known, and he had said nothing, because he did not want her to carry the additional weight of knowing that he knew. And she had said nothing, because she did not want him to carry the weight of knowing what she had heard. Two people. 49 years. One quiet fact, that neither of them was willing to hand to the other, because each of them loved the other enough to carry it alone. She made her tea, and sat at the kitchen table while with the letter folded in front of her, and the sound of the house around her, and eventually she got up, and went to bed. In the morning she was up, before 5, the way she always was. She made coffee. She pulled on Warren's coat, and her work gloves, and she went out, into the dark and cold of the November yard. She walked to the tractor, and stood beside it. The flat green paint was wet, with overnight frost. Her breath showed white in the yard light. The fields beyond the fence were dark, and silent and enormous in the way they are, before dawn, holding everything they held, without announcing any of it. She put her hand on the hood. Not on the dent. Just on the cold metal, feeling the solid particular reality of a thing that exists and continues to exist regardless of what happens around it. Then she walked around to the driver's side, and climbed up, and sat in the seat that Warren had adjusted for his own frame, and never changed back, and she put the key in the ignition, and started the engine. It caught on the first turn. The diesel settled into its low steady rhythm, and the vibration moved through the metal, and into her hands, and she sat, with it, engine running, in the dark, before sunrise on a November morning in Barton County, Kansas, on land that 3 generations of one family had worked, and that she intended to keep working for, as long as she was capable of doing it. She did not go anywhere. She sat with the engine running for several minutes, listening to it, feeling the particular quality of stillness that settles over a yard, when the only sound in it is a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. Then she shut it off, and climbed down, and went inside to start the rest of the day. She did not repaint it that winter. By spring she had stopped thinking she would. The flat green paint, and everything underneath it had become part of what the machine was now, its full history made visible on its surface, and she found she had no desire to simplify it back into something it had not been for 30 years. It sat in the yard, or in the shed depending on the season, and she started it every week the way you maintain something you intend to keep, and occasionally when Hadley came down he would look at it, and not say anything about the color, and she appreciated that more than she would have known how to tell him. There was a morning in late spring, the following year, when she was standing in the doorway of the shed, with her coffee, before the day started, and the light was coming in at the angle it comes in during planting season, low in gold, and full of the specific promise that only exists in that particular hour, and she looked at the 40-20 sitting in the shed beside the newer machine. And she thought about the 40 miles between this yard and the one in Rush County, and how that distance had held a thing in place for 29 years, until the right morning came along, and finally closed it. Warren had written that the tractor was not the real thing he lost. She understood now what he had meant. The real thing was the 6 years of trust he had extended in good faith to a man who had used it as an instrument. You do not get that back by recovering a piece of equipment. You get it back, if you get it back at all, through the slow, patient work of deciding that one man's failure does not constitute evidence about the world in general. Warren had done that work. She had been beside him, while he did it, watching without knowing what she was watching, which is how most of the important things in a long life together get done. She finished her coffee, and set the cup on the shelf inside the shed door, and pulled on her gloves, and started the day. Outside the shed the Kansas morning was opening up across the fields the way it does in planting season, big and clear, and full of things that needed doing. The tractor sat in its place. The land ran out to the horizon in every direction. She went to work.
When I was young, I chased the horizon. Certain peace was waiting there. I thought the storms were wrong turns taken, and every burden was unfair. So I spent years fighting the mountains, cursing every winding road, never seeing that the struggle was the thing that made me grow. The eagle learns within the wind, the oak grows strong beneath the snow, and every soul that's worth becoming must walk where harder paths may go. The road was never meant to be easy. The storm was never meant to pass. The waves were not there to stop me. They were there to teach me how to last. Every trial is part of the journey. Every scar becomes a guide. The mountain is not in my way. The mountain is the reason for the climb. I've known loss that left me broken. I've known fear that stole my breath. I've known nights so cold and endless I could barely take one step. Yet every wound became a teacher. Every failure left a mark, and every valley that I walked through placed another star within the dark. The river doesn't fight the canyon, it learns to carve its way ahead. What seems a wall to those who fear it becomes a path for those who tread. The road was never meant to be easy. The storm was never meant to pass. The waves were not there to stop me. They were there to teach me how to last. Every trial is part of the journey. Every scar becomes a guide. The mountain is not in my way. The mountain is the reason for the climb. For the climb. One day I stopped asking, why me? And started asking, what can I learn? The moment I embraced the fire lost its power to burn. For every challenge holds a gift, though hidden from the eye. The obstacle and destination were never separate all this time. The road was never meant to be to the journey to